They sat across the table expecting me to sign away 50% of my life to support their betrayal. My husband and sister thought this dinner was their victory lap. But when I slammed the thick envelope down, their smiles vanished. Inside was not a settlement check. It was a confession they did not know they had made, transforming their premature celebration into a courtroom where I was the only judge. My name is Eva Thomas. I am 32 years old, the vice president of operations at Atlas Bridge Logistics in Chicago. And tonight, I sat in a booth at the Copper Finch, feeling less like a corporate executive and more like a prisoner waiting for the executioner to test the rope. The restaurant was suffocatingly expensive. It was the kind of place where the lighting was kept intentionally dim to flatter the aging donors of the city, and where the clatter of silver against china sounded too much like the sharpening of knives. I watched a bead of condensation roll down the side of my water glass, tracking its path until it hit the white linen tablecloth. It left a dark, spreading stain, not unlike the rot that had been spreading through my life for the past 3 weeks. Opposite me sat the two architects of my destruction. Blake Carter, my husband, was leaning forward with his elbows on the table. He wore the expression he used when he was trying to close a deal on a used sedan that had a transmission problem he was desperate to hide. It was a look of practiced sincerity, a mask of earnestness that stopped just short of his eyes. Next to him sat Lily Thomas, my younger sister. She was glowing, though not from any spiritual light. It was the radioactive glow of someone who believed she had just gotten away with the heist of the century. She wore a cream-colored maternity dress that looked expensive, likely bought with the credit card I paid off every month. Her hand rested protectively, performatively, on the slight curve of her abdomen, caressing the bump as if it were a pile of gold bullion she had just won in a raffle. They thought they were here to negotiate terms. They thought we were civilized people having a civilized dinner to discuss the dissolution of a marriage that had simply run its course. They did not know that I was not looking at family members across the table. I was looking at the defendants. Blake cleared his throat, a sound that grated against my nerves like sandpaper. He began his pitch. "Eva, look," he started, his voice dropping to that confidential, reasonable register he thought made him sound mature. "We all want this to be amicable. There is no need for lawyers to get nasty or for us to drag things out. It is better for everyone if we just keep this clean." He paused, waiting for me to nod to agree to play the role of the pragmatic problem-solver I had played for our entire marriage. When I remained silent, staring at the knot of his tie, a tie I had bought him for his birthday last year, he shifted in his seat and pressed on. "We have looked at the numbers," he said, using the collective we that made my stomach turn. "The fairest thing to do is to sell the River North apartment. We split the equity 50-50. It gives us both a clean slate. And regarding the investment accounts, I think a straight split is the only moral way to handle it since we built that life together." I almost laughed. Built it together. I remembered the late nights at the logistics center while he played video games. I remembered the spreadsheet I built to pay off his $40,000 of debt. But I kept my face blank, a porcelain mask. And Blake added, glancing quickly at Lily before looking back at me with feigned hesitation. "Given the circumstances, with Lily unable to work for a while and the baby coming, I think a temporary spousal support arrangement is appropriate. Just for 2 years, just until I get back on my feet and we get settled with the little one. It is my child, Ava. I have a responsibility." He said it with such conviction. My child, as if his infidelity was a noble burden, he was shouldering rather than a knife he had twisted in my back. Then it was Lily's turn. She leaned in, her eyes wide and shimmering with that weaponized vulnerability she had perfected since we were children. She reached out as if to touch my hand, but stopped when she saw the coldness in my eyes. She retracted her hand and went back to stroking her stomach. "Ava, please understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We never wanted to hurt you. Love just happened. But you are so strong. You have always been the strong one. You have your career at Atlas Bridge. You have your reputation. You do not need the money the way we do." She looked at Blake, a gaze full of sickening adoration, before turning back to me. "Think about the baby, your niece or nephew. You would not want them to grow up struggling, would you? Mom and Dad are so worried about all this fighting. If you settle this tonight, if you just sign the papers and let us have the start we need, everyone can heal. You can save the family. You can be a bigger person again." The bigger person, the phrase echoed in my head. Be the bigger person so they could remain the small, greedy parasites they were. I watched them. I watched the way Blake's thumb brushed against Lily's wrist under the table, a gesture of intimacy that used to be mine. I watched the way Lily avoided looking directly into my pupils, focusing instead on my chin or my forehead. I cataloged their confidence. They were so sure of me. They were certain that Eva Thomas would do what she always did, fix the mess, pay the bill, and silently endure the burden so that everyone else could be comfortable. They were banking on my pride, assuming I would pay a premium just to make the shame of their affair disappear. They were right about one thing. I was willing to pay a high price, but not for silence. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade into a dull hum, white noise against the sharp clarity of my rage. I did not touch my wine. I did not pick up my fork. Slowly, deliberately, I reached down to the leather tote bag resting against my leg. The movement drew their eyes. They likely expected a checkbook, perhaps a pen to sign the preliminary agreement Blake had foolishly printed out and placed next to his water glass. Instead, I pulled out a heavy, legal-sized manila envelope. It was thick. It was packed so full of documents that the clasp strained to hold it shut. I did not slide it across the table. I lifted it and brought it down in the center of the crisp white tablecloth. Thud. The sound was heavy and dead. A gavel strike made of paper. Blake jumped slightly, the ice in his glass tinkling. Lily stopped smiling, her hand freezing midway through a caress of her belly. The air at our table seemed to drop 10 degrees. The waiter who had been approaching with the bread basket saw the look on my face and wisely pivoted, disappearing back into the shadows. I placed my hands on the table, interlacing my fingers, and finally looked Blake dead in the eye. I saw the first flicker of doubt crack his salesman facade. I saw Lily swallow hard, her eyes darting to the envelope and then back to me, the confidence draining out of her face like water from a cracked vessel. "Before we talk about splitting anything in half," I said, my voice low and steady, devoid of any tremor, "there is one thing that you two have forgotten, and it is also the thing that will decide tonight. Not my life, but yours." The restaurant blurred. The faces of my husband and sister began to fade as my mind pulled away from the present, dragging me back through the agonizing corridor of time. Back to the moment when the ground first opened up beneath me. Back to 3 weeks ago when I still thought I had a family. 3 weeks ago, the world was a different color. It was brighter, sharper, and filled with a golden promise that I had been chasing for a decade. I stood in the corner office of the CEO at Atlas Bridge Logistics, watching the gray Chicago skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass, while the words washed over me like a warm tide. Vice President of Operations. It was not just a title change. It was the culmination of every missed birthday, every late night spent staring at shipping manifests, and every weekend sacrificed to the gods of supply chain management. The compensation package was staggering. There was a salary increase that made my knees weak, a performance bonus structure that could pay off our mortgage in 3 years, and stock options that upon vesting would secure our retirement before we turned 40. I walked out of that office feeling weightless. My feet barely touched the carpeted hallway. My first instinct, the reflex that would soon become my greatest regret, was to share this victory with the people I loved. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling so hard I almost dropped it and dialed Blake. When he answered, I could hear the distraction in his voice, the background noise of a television. But I pushed through it. I told him to clear his schedule. I called Lily next. I told them both to meet me at the Copper Finch. I told them it was the most important night of my life. I told them to order whatever they wanted, the most expensive steaks, the oldest wines, because tonight everything was in the house. Tonight, we were celebrating the fact that we had finally made it. I arrived at the restaurant 30 minutes early. I wanted everything to be perfect. I was wearing a dark green silk dress that I had bought 6 months ago on a whim and hidden in the back of my closet, waiting for a day that felt worthy of it. It hugged my frame, the cool fabric making me feel elegant and powerful. I sat in the booth watching the door, arranging the mental slideshow of how the night would go. I imagined Blake's face lighting up with pride. I imagined him raising a glass, telling me he always knew I could do it. I imagined Lily, my sweet, chaotic little sister, tearing up and hugging me, joking that she finally had a rich sister to spoil her. I saw it so clearly. It was a perfect family portrait painted in my mind. Then the door opened and the paint began to run. They walked in together. That was the first detail that struck a discordant note in my symphony, though I chose to ignore it. They did not arrive separately. They walked through the heavy oak doors side by side, moving with a synchronized rhythm that spoke of a shared journey. Lily was dressed up far more than usual for a casual Tuesday dinner. Her makeup was meticulous, a smoky eye that seemed too harsh for the lighting, and her hair was curled in perfect waves. She was holding on to Blake's arm, not loosely, not like a sister-in-law steadying herself in heels, but tightly, intimately. Her fingers were curled around his bicep, pressing into the fabric of his jacket. Blake looked different, too. He was fidgeting with his tie, a nervous tic he usually only displayed when he was about to ask me to transfer money to his account. When I waved, a wide, beaming smile on my face. He did not smile back. He looked at the floor. He looked at the hostess. He looked anywhere but at me. They slid into the booth opposite me. Lily sat so close to him that their thighs were touching. I felt a prickle of unease at the back of my neck, the primitive part of my brain warning me of a predator. But my conscious mind was too drunk on success to listen. I pushed the menu toward them. "Order anything?" I said, my voice breathless. "Seriously, get the lobster, get the Wagyu. We are celebrating." "Celebrating what exactly?" Blake asked. His voice was tight, dry. I launched into my speech. I told them about the promotion. I told them about the vice president title. I laid out the vision for the new national project I would be leading. I was glowing, radiating energy, waiting for them to catch the spark. But the spark never jumped across the table. Instead of congratulations, I got an interrogation. So Blake cut in, interrupting my description of the new logistics software I would be managing. "The salary hike, is it effective immediately, and the bonus structure you mentioned? Is that cash up front, or is it tied to year-end metrics?" I blinked, confused by the sudden pivot to accounting. "It is a mix," I explained. "But the base salary jump starts next pay period. It is substantial. Blake, we can finally look at upgrading the car. Maybe even that vacation to Italy we talked about and the stock options," Lily chimed in. Her voice was sharp, probing. She was not looking at my face. She was looking at the diamond ring on my finger. "Are they in your name only, or are they marital assets? How does that work if, say, the company gets sold and the apartment?" Blake added, leaning forward, his eyes suddenly intense. "With this new income, does the equity structure of the apartment change, or is it still under that LLC you made?" The questions felt like cold water thrown in my face. They sounded less like family members celebrating a milestone and more like auditors looking for tax loopholes. There was a greed in their eyes, a hungry, calculating gleam that I had never seen before. Or perhaps it had always been there, and I had just been too blinded by love to see it. "Why does all that matter right now?" I asked, a laugh nervously bubbling in my throat. "We have plenty. That is the point. We are safe." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Lily looked at Blake. It was a look of meaningful communication. A signal passed between conspirators. Blake took a deep breath like a man about to jump off a cliff and nodded. Lily reached out and took Blake's hand. She did it right there on the table directly in front of me. She interlaced her fingers with his, squeezing tight. Then she looked at me, a small but sad smile playing on her lips, the kind of smile a nurse gives you before telling you the patient did not make it. "We have news too." "Eva?" Lily said. Her voice was soft, terrifyingly gentle. "I have a surprise. I am pregnant." My brain stuttered. "Pregnant, Lily? That is who is the father. You are not even seeing anyone." She did not answer. She just squeezed Blake's hand harder. I looked at their joined hands. Then I looked at Blake's face. He was turning a shade of pale gray, sweating under the collar I had ironed for him that morning. "It is mine," Blake whispered. The sounds of the restaurant, the clinking of silverware, the low hum of conversation, the jazz music playing softly in the background were instantly sucked out of the room. It was as if I had been plunged underwater. All I could hear was the rushing of blood in my ears, a roar like a jet engine. "What?" I mouthed the word, but no sound came out. "It is Blake's," Lily repeated, her voice gaining strength, shifting from confession to defiance. "We fell in love, Ava. It was not planned. It just happened. We tried to fight it, we really did, but the connection was too strong. And now there is a baby, a part of Blake, a part of our family." I sat frozen. My hands were resting on the table, still clutching the napkin. I felt paralyzed, as if my nervous system had simply shut down to protect me from the trauma of the moment. Blake finally looked at me, his eyes pleading for an understanding I did not possess. "It started when you were traveling for the West Coast expansion," he said, the words spilling out in a rush. "I was lonely. Lily was there. She understood me. She listened to me in a way you have not had time to do in years. Ava, it was a mistake at first, but then it became real." "We did not want to hide it from you anymore," Lily said, smoothing her hand over her stomach. "Especially now, we need to do this right for the baby." Then came the pitch, the sales pitch for my own destruction. "Eva," Blake said, his voice taking on that reasonable negotiating tone again. "You are successful. You just made VP. You have everything going for you. We are struggling. We want to be a family. We want to raise this child together. So, we think the best thing, the most noble thing, is for you to give us a quick divorce. Think about your reputation," Lily added, leaning in. "You are an executive now. You do not want a messy public scandal about your husband sleeping with your sister. It would look so bad for Atlas Bridge if you just sign everything over. If you let us have the apartment and a fair share of the assets to start our life, we can keep this quiet. You can be a generous aunt. You can be the hero who stepped aside for the sake of a child." They kept talking. They used words like dignity and fairness and love. But I was no longer listening. I looked at the dark green silk of my dress, the dress I had worn to celebrate the best day of my life. I realized with a cold, crystalline clarity that this was not a celebration. It was an ambush. They had not come here to toast my success. They had come here to carve it up and feast on the carcass. I sat there paralyzed while the waitress poured water into our glasses, oblivious to the fact that the woman in the green dress had just died, and a new, colder woman was being born in her chair. This was the night I was supposed to win. Instead, it was the night they decided to execute me, or so they thought. To understand how my husband and my sister could sit across from me at a dinner table and demand my life as compensation for their betrayal, you have to understand where we came from. This did not begin in a high-rise in Chicago. It began in a cramping, drafty house in a rusted-out steel town in Ohio, where the air always smelled faintly of sulfur and resignation. Our parents were good people in the way that people who are too tired to be anything else are good. They worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to keep the lights on and the mortgage paid. My father drove a delivery truck, and my mother worked the register at a pharmacy, They were exhausted, perpetually gray-faced, and they loved us the best they could. But love in the Thomas household was a finite resource, much like money. And somewhere along the line, it was decided that Lily needed more of it than I did. I was the oldest. I was the sturdy one. I was the one who learned to cook hamburger helper at 10 years old so Mom could sleep for an extra hour between shifts. By the time I was 16, I was working 20 hours a week bagging groceries at the local market, handing over half my paycheck to the family jar on the kitchen counter without being asked. Lily was different. Lily was 4 years younger, born with wide, watery eyes and a constitution that my mother always described as delicate. While I was stacking cans of beans on dusty shelves, Lily was allowed to focus on her youth. She took art classes. She needed expensive paints. She needed rides to the mall because the bus made her anxious. I remember the exact moment I realized that my role in this family was to be the fuel that kept Lily warm. It was the morning of my interview for a full scholarship to a state university. It was my ticket out. I had spent months studying, perfecting my essays, and saving tips from the grocery store to buy a decent outfit. It was a navy blue dress, simple and professional, the most expensive thing I owned at $50. I was standing in front of the hallway mirror, checking my hair, my heart hammering against my ribs. Lily came up behind me. She was 12 then, bored and sulky because my interview meant no one could drive her to her friend's house until the afternoon. "Fix my collar, will you?" she asked, reaching out, but she did not touch my collar. Her hand snagged on the zipper at the back of my dress. She yanked. It was not a gentle tug. It was a sharp, violent pull. The sound of fabric tearing was loud in the quiet hallway. I spun around, horrified, reaching back to feel the cold air on my skin where the zipper had completely separated from the fabric, leaving a gaping hole. "Oops!" Lily said. Her voice was flat. There was no surprise in her eyes, only a strange, dull satisfaction. I screamed. I could not help it. The panic overwhelmed me. My mother came running from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. When she saw the dress, she did not scold Lily. She did not ask why Lily had pulled so hard. She looked at me, her face tightening with annoyance. "Eva, why didn't you have a backup outfit? You know, accidents happen. Why do you leave everything to the last minute?" "She ripped it," I yelled, tears stinging my eyes. "She did it on purpose." Lily immediately burst into tears. Great heaving sobs that shook her small frame. "I was just trying to help," she wailed. "I am so clumsy. I ruined everything. Eva hates me." My mother's face softened instantly. She wrapped her arms around Lily, shushing her, stroking her hair. "It is okay, baby. It is okay. You are not clumsy. Eva is just stressed. She did not mean to yell at you." Then she looked over Lily's head at me, her eyes hard. "Fix it with a safety pin and put a blazer over it and stop upsetting your sister. She is sensitive." That was the script. I was the rock. Rocks do not break, so you do not have to worry about dropping them. Lily was the glass. Glass is precious, and if it breaks, it is the fault of the person holding it. I went to the interview with a safety pin digging into my spine. I got the scholarship. Not because I was confident, but because I was desperate. I left Ohio and never looked back. But I carried that safety pin in my soul for years. College was supposed to be my liberation, but the patterns of childhood are hard to break. In my junior year, I met Derek. He was charming, full of big ideas about tech startups, and he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. I was so starved for someone to take care of me, for someone to see me as something other than a utility that I let him in completely. I trusted him. I trusted him enough to leave my purse unattended. I trusted him enough to believe him when he said he just needed to borrow my information for a background check for a shared apartment. I found out the truth when a collection agency called me during a microeconomics lecture. Derek had opened 3 credit cards in my name. He had racked up $7,000 in debt buying electronics, dinners for other girls, and a trip to Cabo that I certainly did not go on. When I confronted him, he cried. He used the same words Lily used. He was messed up. He was going through a hard time. He thought I would understand because I was so together. That was my first lesson in how trust can be weaponized. It took me 2 years to pay off that $7,000. I worked double shifts at a diner, sleeping 4 hours a night, eating ramen noodles, and selling my textbooks. I paid every cent. And when the balance hit zero, I made a vow. I swore that no one would ever touch my financial foundation again. I built a fortress around my life, constructed of spreadsheets, savings accounts, and eventually the Thomas Harbor LLC. Then I met Blake. Blake was different, or so I told myself. He was not slick like Derek. He was a little rough around the edges, a used car salesman with a messy past and a smile that made me feel safe. He admitted his flaws. He told me about his $40 euro in debt on our third date. He didn't hide it. I thought his honesty was a sign of integrity. I did not realize that honesty without action is just a confession. I fell in love with him because he seemed to need me. But not in the way my family did. He applauded my ambition. He bragged about my promotions. I thought I had finally found a partner. I broke my own rule. I used my bonus to pay off his debt, justifying it as an investment in our future. But I kept the armor on. I made him sign the loan agreement. I kept the LLC. I listened to my lawyer friend Nora, even when Blake rolled his eyes and called me paranoid. But while I was building a life with Blake, Lily was always there, lurking at the periphery like a ghost haunting a bank vault. As an adult, Lily never really changed. She bounced from one passion project to another, funded first by our parents and then by me. Every time she ran out of money, my mother would call and I would pay because it was easier than fighting. But the resentment only grew. I saw it in the way she looked at my new car. I heard it in the snide comments she made at Thanksgiving. "Must be nice to be corporate," she would say, sipping wine I had paid for. Some of us care more about art than selling our souls. I realized too late that my generosity did not buy her gratitude. It bought her entitlement. Over the years, Lily began to view my success not as something I earned, but as a natural resource she had a claim to. In her mind, my bank account was a family trust and my hard work was just the mechanism that kept it filled for her. She did not steal Blake because she loved him. I knew that as I sat in the restaurant, remembering the way she used to look at my toys, my clothes, my life. She stole Blake because he was the one thing I had that she couldn't ask me to transfer to her on Venmo. She stole him because she wanted to prove that the perfect sister wasn't perfect. She wanted to take the one thing I had built that didn't have a price tag, and she wanted to see if she could make it hers. The baby, or the idea of the baby, was just the ultimate trump card. It was the ripped zipper all over again. "I'm clumsy. I made a mistake. Now fix it, Eva. Give us the house. Give us the money. Be the big sister." But they had forgotten one thing. I was not 16 anymore, and I was done using safety pins to hold myself together while they held the scissors. I looked at them across the table at the smugness radiating off my sister and the weak, greedy hope on my husband's face, and I felt the last thread of familial obligations snap. I had spent my whole life paying for their weaknesses. Tonight, I was going to make them pay for mine. I met Blake in the most cliché of modern purgatories, a departure gate at Denver International Airport during a blizzard. We were both stranded, two refugees from the corporate timeline, staring at a monitor that displayed the word delayed in a mocking red font. I was furiously typing an email on my BlackBerry trying to salvage a supply chain meeting while he was sitting 2 seats away, eating a bag of pretzels with the carefree demeanor of a man who had nowhere to be. He struck up a conversation about the terrible airport carpet. It was a stupid opening line, but he delivered it with a crooked, boyish grin that disarmed me. He was a used car salesman from the suburbs, a man who wore polyester blends and smelled faintly of Pine air freshener. But he had a warmth that I had been starving for in the cold, sterile world of logistics. He told me he was coming back from a failed business venture, a garage he had tried to open with a buddy. He made it sound like a romantic tragedy, a valiant effort against the cruel economy. Rather than what it likely was bad math and poor planning, I fell for the potential I saw in him. I saw a fixer-upper, a project I could manage, a chaotic variable I could organize into a success story. When things got serious 6 months later, the financial reality of Blake Carter hit me like a balance sheet full of red ink. We were sitting in my rental apartment, and he confessed that the failed garage had left him with over $40,000 in high-interest debt. He looked at me with those puppy dog eyes, the same ones that had charmed me in Denver, and told me he was drowning. He said the interest payments alone were eating his commission checks. I did what I always did. I engaged my spreadsheet brain. I did not run. I did not tell him that a man in his 30s should know better. Instead, I looked at my year-end bonus from Atlas Bridge, a sum I had earmarked for a down payment on a house, and I made a decision. I would save him. But I was not stupid. I had been burned by Derek, and the scar tissue from that $7 lesson was still thick. I called Nora Alvarez. Nora was my best friend from college, a shark in a tailored suit who practiced family and corporate law in New York. When I told her I was going to pay off Blake's debt, she screamed at me for 10 minutes. When she realized I was stubborn, she sighed and sent me a document. It was a personal loan agreement. It stated clearly that the $4,200 I was transferring to Blake was a loan, not a gift, repayable upon demand or according to a set schedule, if the relationship ended. I remember the night I put it in front of him. We were drinking cheap wine on my couch. "I want to help you," I said, sliding the paper toward him. "I can pay off the sharks, but I need you to sign this. It is just for my records, just so we are clear." Blake looked at the paper, then at me. He laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound. "Babe, seriously, a contract. We are in love. This is stuff rich people do to keep their servants in line." "It is protection, Blake," I said, my voice steady for both of us. "It keeps things clean," he groaned, rolling his eyes as he uncapped a pen. "You and your paperwork. You are so intense, Eva." "Fine, if it makes you sleep better." He signed it without reading a single clause. He did not look at the interest rate, which was set to the federal minimum. He did not look at the repayment terms. He just wanted the money, and he signed his name with a flourish, as if he were giving me an autograph, rather than signing away his financial leverage. 2 years later, just before the wedding, I bought an apartment in River North. It was a beautiful place. A corner unit with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. It screamed success. It was the kind of place I had dreamed of when I was bagging groceries in Ohio. But I did not put Blake's name on the deed. Nora had flown in for a weekend and over a rigorous brunch. She had laid out the structure for Thomas Harbor LLC. "You are the primary earner," Nora had said, cutting her eggs Benedict with surgical precision. "He is in sales and the market is volatile. You are buying this asset with your premarital savings. Put it in an LLC. Make yourself the sole member. If he sues you, if he crashes a car, if he gets sued by a client, the house is safe. And if you divorce, it is not marital property. It is a business asset." I felt a twinge of guilt, a feeling that I was betting against my own marriage before it had even started. But then I remembered the $40,000. I remembered Derek, and I signed the incorporation papers. Blake hated the LLC even more than the loan agreement. "Why can't it just be Mr. and Mrs. Carter?" he complained when we were moving boxes in Thomas Harbor LLC. "It sounds like a shipping company. It is our home." "Ava, why do you have to make everything a transaction? It is liability protection." I lied, though it was only a partial lie. Nora said it is the smartest way to handle taxes. "Whatever," he muttered, carrying a box of his video games into the living room. "As long as I have a key and the Wi-Fi works, you can name it whatever you want." He never asked to see the operating agreement. He never asked about the equity structure. As long as I paid the mortgage, the HOA fees, and the property tax, he was content to live like a guest in a 5-star hotel who had forgotten to check out. Then came Lily after the wedding. My sister decided that Ohio was stifling her creative spirit. She announced she was coming to Chicago to find herself and pursue opportunities in mixed media composition, whatever that meant. Finding herself apparently involved sleeping on my Italian leather sofa for 3 weeks at a time. She was a whirlwind of chaos in my meticulously ordered life. She left wet towels on the bathroom floor. She drank the expensive juice I bought for my morning smoothies, and she flirted with my husband. It wasn't overt at first. It was inside jokes. It was tickle fights that lasted a few seconds too long. It was the way she would curl up on the other end of the couch while he watched football, wearing shorts that were far too short, laughing too loudly at his mediocre commentary. "You guys are so stiff," she would say, looking at me while I sat at the dining table with my laptop finishing a report on Sunday night. "Eva, come on. Put the computer away. Blake is trying to tell a joke. You are so dry. You are like a walking Excel file." Blake would laugh. She is the breadwinner. Lil got to respect the hustle. But there was a resentment in his voice, a subtle dig that suggested my hard work was a buzzkill rather than the reason he was sitting in climate-controlled comfort watching a 60-inch television. I swallowed the insults. I told myself this was just family. Lily was the free spirit. I was the anchor. Blake was just being a good brother-in-law. I was the one with the problem. I was the one who was too uptight. Then came the text message. It was a Tuesday night, about 6 months before the dinner at the Copper Finch. Blake had gone out to meet some old friends from the dealership. Lily had gone out separately to an art gallery opening. I stayed home with a migraine and a stack of invoices. Blake came home at 2:00 in the morning, smelling of gin and cheap perfume. He stumbled into bed, leaving his phone on the nightstand. It lit up. I should not have looked, but the instincts that had kept me alive in the corporate world kicked in. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Lily. "Don't tell her about last night." The winking face, that semicolon and parenthesis, burned itself into my retinas. My heart hammered against my ribs. I woke him up. I demanded an explanation. Blake rubbed his face, looking groggy and annoyed. He looked at the phone and let out a sigh that sounded painfully genuine. "Ava, you are crazy," he said. "She got wasted at the gallery. She called me because she couldn't find her Uber. I picked her up and dropped her at her friend's place. She threw up in my car. That is what she doesn't want you to know. She knows you will lecture her about being irresponsible." He looked at me with such exhaustion, such disappointment that I would accuse him of something so vile. "Ideally, I would not be cleaning up your sister's vomit, but I did it because she is family. And now I am getting the 3rd degree. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. The alternative that my husband and my sister were betraying me under my nose was too horrific to contemplate. It would mean that my entire reality was a lie. So, I chose the comfortable lie over the jagged truth. I apologized. I went to sleep. A week later, I had lunch with Nora when she was in town for a deposition. I told her about Lily, about the text, about the vomit excuse. Nora put down her fork. She looked at me with eyes that had seen hundreds of divorces. "Eva," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "You need a postnup, a postnuptial agreement. We update the asset schedule. We will clarify everything." "A postnup?" I laughed nervously. "Nora, we are fine." He explained it. "If I ask for a postnup now, he will think I don't trust him. It will destroy the marriage. The marriage might already be destroyed." "Honey, you just haven't received the memo yet," Nora said darkly. "Just do it. Frame it as estate planning. Say it is a requirement for your new position at Atlas Bridge. Blame the corporate lawyers. Just get his signature on a document that says, 'What is yours is yours.'" "You are so cynical," I said, shaking my head. What is the worst that can happen? Lily isn't going to steal him. The worst thing is she moves in permanently and I have to buy more groceries. Nora looked at me, and for the first time in our friendship, she didn't argue. She just looked sad. Okay, Eva, but I am drafting it anyway, and I want you to keep it in the safe just in case life throws you something worse than a freeloading sister. I took the document she sent me a week later. I made Blake sign it one night when he was tipsy and happy because I had just bought him a new set of golf clubs. I told him it was just insurance paperwork for the LLC. He signed it with a sloppy scrawl, kissed me on the cheek, and went back to practicing his putting in the hallway. I put it in the safe and forgot about it. I thought I was paranoid. I thought I was being dry, Eva. The Excel spreadsheet with a heartbeat. I did not know that I had just loaded the gun that I would fire 3 years later at the Copper Finch. I did not know that the worst thing wasn't Lily moving in. It was Lily moving in, taking my husband, and trying to take the life I had built to protect us all. I paid the bill. It was a reflex, a muscle memory honed over a decade of being the one who handled everything. While Lily sat there weeping softly into a linen napkin about the beauty of unplanned miracles, and Blake stared at his untouched steak with the sullen look of a child caught stealing candy, I raised my hand. I signaled the waiter. I handed over my black credit card. The chip reader beeped a sharp electronic chirp that sounded like a flatline in the dead silence of my soul. I added a 20% tip. I signed the receipt. I did it all with the mechanical precision of a robot that had been programmed to function even after its head had been cut off. They watched me do it. Neither of them reached for a wallet. Neither of them offered to split the cost of the meal where they had just served me my own heart on a platter. They just let me pay. That was the moment. More than the confession itself. When I realized exactly what I was to them, I stood up. My legs felt strange, distant, as if I were walking on stilts. I am leaving, I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from inside a tunnel. Ava, wait, Blake said, scrambling up. We should drive back together. We need to talk about the logistics. Logistics? I repeated. It was a word from my world, a word I loved. Now it sounded like a curse. I walked out of the Copper Finch without looking back. The valet brought my car around, my sleek, dark sedan that I had bought as a reward for my last promotion. Blake slid into the passenger seat before I could lock the door. Lily stayed on the curb, clutching her stomach, watching us with wide, tragic eyes as if she were the heroine in a war movie saying goodbye to a soldier. I pulled out into the Chicago traffic. The city was alive with lights, blurring into streaks of red and white against the rain that had started to fall. The windshield wipers moved back and forth. Swish, 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 swish. It was the only sound in the car for 5 blocks. Ava, say something, Blake pleaded. He reached out to touch my arm, but I flinched so violently the car swerved slightly. He pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. It is not what you think, he started. The script was so predictable it made me nauseous. It just started. You were in Seattle for the merger, then you were in New York, I was here, Lily was here. We were both lonely. We were just comforting each other. And then we slipped. Things just slid out of control. Slipped. He said it as if he had tripped on an icy sidewalk. As if sleeping with his wife's sister and impregnating her was an accident of gravity. A simple loss of friction rather than a series of deliberate, conscious choices made over months. You slipped, I said. My voice was terrifyingly calm. I did not recognize it. You slipped out of your clothes. You slipped into her bed. You slipped the condom off. Which part was the accident? Blake, don't be like that, he whined, shifting in the leather seat. You know how I get when I'm alone. I need a connection. You are always so busy. You are married to that job. Lily was there. She made me feel seen. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned the color of bone. He was blaming me. He was sitting in the car I paid for, wearing the suit I bought him, telling me that his infidelity was the natural consequence of my ambition. We approached a red light at a deserted intersection. The light turned yellow, then red. I pressed the brake. The car came to a smooth, silent halt. I unbuckled my seatbelt. The mechanism clicked loudly in the quiet cabin. I turned my head and looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the weak chin I used to think was gentle. I saw the shifting eyes I used to think were shy. I saw a man who was made of nothing but need and excuses. "Get out," I said. Blake blinked. "What?" "We are miles from home." I said, "Get out." I leaned across and unlocked his door. "This is where you get off. You said you and Lily are a family now. You said you need to support her. Good. Go support her. Ask Lily where you are sleeping tonight because it is not in my house. Eva, it is raining," he sputtered, looking at the dark, wet street. "Be reasonable. Just drive me to the apartment so I can pack a bag." "You have legs," I said. "Use them." I stared at him until the realization hit him that I was not bluffing. He cursed under his breath, slammed the door, and stood on the corner, looking small and pathetic under the street lamp. I waited for the light to turn green. When it did, I drove away. I watched him shrink in the rearview mirror until he was just a speck of dirt that I had finally washed off my life. The drive home was a blur. I do not remember parking. I do not remember taking the elevator up to the 42nd floor. I only remember walking into the apartment, my sanctuary, my achievement, and feeling like I was walking into a tomb. I tossed my purse on the kitchen island. My phone, which had been vibrating incessantly in my bag, lit up the dark room. I looked at the screen, 14 missed calls from Mom, 3 missed calls from Dad, 6 text messages from Lily. I picked it up. My thumb hovered over the screen. I knew I shouldn't answer. I knew nothing good could come from opening that line of communication. But the conditioning was deep. The wire in my brain that said, pick up, fix it, handle it, was too strong to cut in a single night. I called my mother back. She answered on the first ring. There was no, hello, no, are you okay? There was just weeping. "Ava," she wailed. "Oh, thank God, Lily is hysterical. She just called me. She said you left them there. She said you kicked Blake out on the street in the rain. How could you be so cruel? She is pregnant. Eva, she is carrying your niece or nephew." I stood in the dark kitchen listening to the woman who gave birth to me prioritize the feelings of the sister who had just stabbed me in the back. "Mom?" I said, my voice shaking. "She slept with my husband. They are asking me to divorce him so they can play house. Do you hear yourself?" I know. Mom sobbed. "It is terrible. It is a mess. But you have to understand she is fragile. She is not like you. You are strong. Eva, you can handle pain. Lily's guilt is eating her alive. And Blake, well, he is the father. We have to think about the blood. Family is family no matter what mistakes are made." The words twisted in my gut like a knife. You can handle pain. That was my sentence, because I could endure it. I was expected to because Lily crumbled. She was entitled to be carried. "They want me to sell the apartment," I said quietly. "They want half my assets." "Well," Mom sniffled, her tone shifting slightly, becoming hesitant but persistent. "Maybe that is not the worst idea. Not everything." "Of course, but Ava, they are going to need help. A baby costs so much and you have that big promotion. You have so much extra. Would it really be so bad to help them with a down payment on a small place just to get them started? For the baby's sake, you do not want them living in a rental, do you?" I lowered the phone from my ear. I stared at it in the darkness. She was asking me to fund their betrayal. She was asking me to subsidize the life they stole from me. "Eva, are you there?" Mom's voice was tinny and distant. "Please, my honey, be the bigger person. Do it for me. My heart can't take this fight." I hung up. I did not say goodbye. I did not argue. I just pressed the red button and dropped the phone onto the granite counter. I walked over to the cabinet. I took out a water glass. I walked to the sink and filled it, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. I took a sip, but I couldn't swallow. I stood there gripping the glass. I squeezed it. I squeezed it harder. I wanted to feel something other than the gaping hole in my chest. I wanted the glass to break. I wanted to see blood on my hands so I would know I was still real. I realized then, standing in the shadow of my expensive refrigerator, that I had never truly been loved by any of them. I was an investment. I had an insurance policy. I was a safety net. They loved my resilience because it meant they didn't have to be strong. They loved my money because it meant they didn't have to work. They loved my forgiveness because it meant they never had to face consequences. I realized then that to them I had never been a wife or a sister. I was a resource, a wallet with a pulse, and that resource had finally decided to dry up. I sank down onto the cold tile floor. I sat with my back against the dishwasher, the glass still clutched in my hand, though I relaxed my grip before it shattered. The adrenaline that had carried me through the dinner and the drive began to drain away, leaving behind a profound, aching exhaustion. I sat there for hours. I watched the digital clock on the microwave change numbers. 2 in the morning, 3, 0 in the morning, 4 in the morning. Slowly, the sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows began to change. The inky black turned to a bruised purple, then a cold steel gray. The sun was coming up over Lake Michigan. The light filtered into the kitchen, illuminating the wreckage of my night. My green silk dress was crushed and wrinkled. My mascara was likely smeared. I was alone in a silent apartment that felt too big for one person. But as the first ray of genuine sunlight hit the floorboards, something shifted in my chest. The tears I had been expecting never came. The hysteria Nora had warned me about did not arrive. Instead, a cold, hard clarity settled over me like a suit of armor. I looked at my hands. They were shaking, but they were my hands. I looked around the apartment. It was my apartment. I thought about the job I went to every day, the career I had built brick by brick while they played games. For 32 years, I had been the savior. I had saved my parents from their mortgage. I had saved Lily from her mistakes. I had saved Blake from his debt. I had spent my entire life throwing life preservers to people who were perfectly capable of swimming, but preferred to float on my back. No more. I placed the water glass on the floor. I stood up. My knees popped and my body ached. But I stood up straight. I was not going to save them this time. I was going to let them drown. And for the first time in my life, I was going to swim for the shore alone at 7 in the morning. I sat at my dining table with a mug of cold coffee and my phone in my hand. I was no longer the weeping woman on the kitchen floor. I was the vice president of operations, and I had a crisis to manage. I dialed Nora Alvarez. Nora answered on the second ring. Her voice was crisp, lacking the morning grogginess that plagued normal people. She was a partner at a top-tier firm in Manhattan, and she billed $600 an hour. I was getting her for free, but the advice she was about to give me was worth millions. Eva, she said, it is early. Tell me you are calling because you finally decided to sue that contractor for the bathroom tile. Blake is having an affair with Lily, I said. My voice was flat. It was the voice I used when I had to tell a client that their shipment was lost at sea. They announced it at dinner last night. They want a divorce. They want me to sell the apartment and split the assets. There was silence on the other end of the line. It lasted exactly 3 seconds. Go on, Nora said. No gasp, no pity, just a prompt for more data. I continued my report. I listed the demands. I detailed the timeline Blake had given me. I recounted the conversation in the car. I stayed completely detached, treating the destruction of my marriage like a case study and failed risk management. And I said, pausing to take a breath that rattled in my chest, Lily said she is pregnant. She says it is Blake's child. That was where the facade cracked. My voice broke on the word child. A sharp, pathetic sob escaped my throat before I could clamp my hand over my mouth. "Okay," Nora said. Her tone shifted. It did not become softer. It became harder, like steel tempering in fire. "Stop right there. We are done with the crying phase. We are now in the strategic phase. Eva, listen to me. Do not talk to them. Do not text them. Do not answer your mother. Go to your safe. My safe. The floor is safe in the closet," Nora commanded. "The one you installed when you bought the place. The one where I told you to keep the in case of emergency file. Go now." I walked into the master bedroom. It smelled like Blake's cologne, a scent that used to comfort me, but now made my stomach turn. I went into the walk-in closet, pushed aside the rows of hanging suits and the rack of designer shoes, and pulled up the small section of carpet in the corner. I keyed in the code my birthday. A date that felt irrelevant now, and the heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, buried under a layer of dust and a box of grandmother's jewelry, was a thick plastic accordion folder. "I have it," I told Nora, putting the phone on speaker and setting it on the floor next to me. "Open it," Nora said. "Tell me what is inside." I pulled out the documents. My hands were shaking, but my mind was beginning to clear. I have the deed to the apartment. It is in the name of Thomas Harbor, LLC. I have the articles of incorporation. I have the personal loan agreement for the $42 I paid to the creditors for Blake. "Good," Nora said. "And the post-nuptial, the one we drafted after the incident with the text message," I dug deeper. "It is here, signed and notarized, dated 3 years ago." "Excellent," Nora said, and I could practically hear her smiling. "Read me Clause 4, Section B." I flipped through the pages. Any assets acquired by Eva Thomas prior to the marriage, or any assets held within Thomas Harbor LLC, are designated as separate property and are not subject to equitable distribution. Blake Carter waives all claims to said property in perpetuity. "Ironclad," Nora murmured. "He signed it because he was guilty and stupid. Now look for anything else. Financial statements? Tax returns? Anything with his signature." I reached into the back of the safe. My fingers brushed against something that was not a legal document. It was a white envelope, standard letter size, but it had never been opened. The seal was still intact. I pulled it out. The return address in the top left corner read the Fertility Institute of Chicago. My breath hitched. I stared at the envelope, and suddenly the memory washed over me. 1 year ago, we had been trying to conceive for 6 months with no luck. I had gone through the battery of tests, blood work, ultrasounds, cycle tracking. Everything on my end was perfect. Then it was Blake's turn. He had complained for weeks about going. He said it was emasculating. He canceled 2 appointments. Finally, I had practically dragged him there. He went in for the analysis. A week later, this envelope had arrived in the mail. But that same week, Blake's mother had been hospitalized with a stroke. The crisis had consumed us. The envelope had been tossed into the safe for safekeeping while we dealt with the family emergency. And in the chaos that followed, I had genuinely forgotten to open it. We had stopped trying to conceive shortly after as work got busy and the distance between us grew. "Ava," Nora asked, "what did you find?" "A letter?" I whispered. "From the fertility clinic from last year. We never opened it." "Open it," Nora said. "Right now." I tore the top of the envelope. The paper was thick. I unfolded the single sheet inside. It was a standard lab report, dense with medical terminology and reference ranges. My eyes scanned down the page looking for the summary. Patient Blake Carter. Date of service, October 14th, 2022. Test semen analysis. I looked at the numbers, or rather the lack of them. Under the column for sperm concentration, the number was 0. Under motility, the number was 0. Under morphology, the number was 0. I read the doctor's notes at the bottom, written in a clear, uncompromising font. Diagnosis: aospermia. No sperm detected in the sample. Patient history indicates severe mumps or ketes in adolescence, likely resulting in permanent testicular atrophy and complete infertility. Natural conception is statistically impossible. The room spun. I sat back on my heels, clutching the paper so hard it crinkled. "Ava." Nora's voice was sharp. "Read it to me." "He is sterile," I said. My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from someone else. "Nora, he is completely sterile. The doctor says natural conception is impossible. He had MS when he was a kid. It destroyed everything." The line went dead silent. I looked at the paper again, letting the reality sink in. Blake Carter could not have children. He had never been able to have children. All those months I spent worrying that my stress was the problem, that my career was making my body hostile to a baby. It was all a lie. But he didn't know. We had never opened the letter. He had lived his whole life assuming he was a viral man. And for the last 3 weeks, he had been walking around believing he had impregnated my sister. "Ava," Nora said softly, "do you realize what this means?" "It means Lily is lying," I said, the anger rising in my chest like bile. "It means she is pregnant by someone else, and she is pinning it on Blake to get my money." "Or," Nora cut in, her lawyer brain moving 3 steps ahead, "it means she is not pregnant at all." I froze. "Think about it," Nora continued, her voice accelerating. "They need money. Blake is broke without you. Lily has never held a job for more than 6 months. They know you. They know your weakness is your family. They know you would pay anything to make a problem go away to protect the family reputation. The pregnancy is not a biological reality. Ava, it is a leverage play. It is a blackmail device." My mind raced back to dinner. Lily's hand on her stomach, the way she stroked it, the way she talked about the miracle, the way she used the baby as a shield every time the conversation turned to money. If she is pregnant, Nora said it is not his. And if it is not his entire claim for paternity support evaporates. If she is not pregnant, then this is fraud. Attempted extortion. I looked down at the pile of papers on my lap. On one side, I had the legal armor, the LLC documents that proved I owned the apartment, the loan agreement that proved Blake owed $42,000 plus interest, and the post-nuptial agreement where he had waived his rights to my assets. On the other side, I had the weapon, a piece of paper that proved his infidelity was not just a betrayal of me, but a betrayal of biological reality. I picked up the fertility report. It felt heavy in my hand, heavier than the thick envelope I had slammed on the table at the restaurant. "Nora," I said, a cold smile touching my lips for the first time in 24 hours. "I have everything. I have the post-nup. I have a loan. And I have proof that he is shooting blanks." "Then we are done playing defense," Nora said. "We are going on the offensive. You are going to meet them again, but not yet. Let them stew. Let them think you are scared. Let them think you are gathering the cash. And then when we are ready, you are going to walk into that room and you are going to destroy them." I looked at the safe, then at the closet full of clothes I wore to look the part of the successful executive. I realized I didn't need the clothes anymore. I had the truth. "The post-nup," I said, flipping to the signature page. "It says that if the marriage ends due to adultery, the offending party forfeits any claim to spousal support." "Exactly," Nora said, "and usually proving adultery is messy. It requires private investigators, photos, timestamps, but you don't need that. You have a sister walking around claiming to be carrying his child. She is the living, breathing proof of his breach of contract. And the best part, the proof is built on a lie that we can expose with one sheet of paper." I closed the safe. I locked it. I held the folder to my chest. "They wanted a settlement," I said to the empty room. "I am going to give them one." "Get some sleep, Ava," Nora said gently, "and scan those documents for me. I will draft the divorce papers. By the time you sit down with them again, the ink will be dry. I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was fully up now, bathing Chicago in harsh, revealing light. I looked out at the city, at the empire of logistics and transport that I helped run. I moved things for a living. I moved massive containers across oceans. I managed complex supply chains. I knew how to transport goods. And now I knew exactly how to transport my husband and my sister out of my life. The envelope in the restaurant had been a warning shot. The folder in my hand was the nuclear option, and I was the one with the launch codes. The next 3 days were a masterclass in deception, but for the first time in my life, I was the one pulling the strings. Nora laid out the strategy with the precision of a general directing a siege. "Starve them," she said. "Cut the supply lines, watch them panic, then when they are desperate, offer them a meeting." I started with the money. I went to the bank during my lunch break and opened a new checking account solely in my name at a different institution. I redirected my direct deposit. I went into my primary account, the one Blake had a debit card for, and transferred 90% of the liquid cash into the new account. Then I logged into the credit card portal and froze his authorized user card. I canceled the auto pay for his Spotify, his gym membership, and the monthly subscription for the exclusive cigar club he never went to. The reaction was immediate. At 2:00 p.m. on Tuesday, my phone buzzed. It was Blake. "Hey, I tried to buy gas." The car declined. Bank error. I waited an hour before replying. "Weird. I'll check it later." In meetings all day at 4:00 p.m. "Eva, serious. I'm at the grocery store. It's embarrassing. Can you unlock it?" I didn't reply. Let him be embarrassed. Let him feel what it was like to stand at a register and realize you had nothing of your own. Then came Lily. She played from a different angle. She didn't ask for money directly. She painted a picture of suffering that required financial intervention. She sent long, rambling texts about her severe morning sickness, about how she was dizzy and couldn't stand up, about how the smell of her apartment building was making her vomit. She mentioned casually that her rent was due in 3 days and her landlord was threatening eviction. "I just want the baby to be safe," she texted. "Stress is so bad for development." "I'm scared, Eva," I replied with vague, non-committal phrases. "That sounds hard. Drink ginger tea. We'll figure something out eventually." I was baiting them. I needed them to feel the walls closing in. I needed their greed to mutate into desperation because desperate people make mistakes. And Lily made a massive one on Thursday afternoon. It was raining again. A cold gray drizzle that slicked the Chicago streets. I was in the lobby of my building waiting for a courier to deliver some contracts when the automatic doors slid open. Lily walked in. She looked pathetic, intentionally so. She was wearing an oversized gray hoodie that hung off her frame, and she was clutching her stomach as if she were holding it in place. Her hair was messy, and her eyes were red-rimmed. When she saw me, she let out a sob that echoed off the marble floors. "Eva!" she cried, rushing toward me. I didn't know where else to go. "Blake is at a job interview." A lie. I knew he was playing video games at his friend's house, and I started spotting blood. "Ava? I'm scared I'm losing it." She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "I need to go to a private clinic. The ER wait times are too long. I can't lose this baby. Please." "It costs $500 for the emergency scan." I looked at her. I looked at the performance. And then, as she leaned into me, burying her face in my shoulder to hide her dry eyes, her hoodie rode up slightly. I saw it. It was just a flash, a glimpse of skin that wasn't skin. Just above the waistband of her leggings where her bump began, there was a distinct, unnatural ridge. It was the color of flesh, but the texture was wrong. It was smooth, matte, and it had a seam. My heart stopped, then restarted with a violent thud. It wasn't a baby. It was silicone. I didn't pull away. I didn't scream. I hugged her back, patting her shoulder with a hand that wanted to strangle her. It's okay, Lily, I cooed, my voice dripping with false concern. You poor thing. Come upstairs. Use the bathroom. I'll get my purse. We went up to the apartment. I led her to the guest bathroom. Go clean up, I said. I'll find my checkbook. The moment the bathroom door clicked shut, I pounced. Her purse was sitting on the kitchen island where she had dropped it in her theatrical rush. I opened it. It was a chaotic mess of lipstick, gum wrappers, and unpaid bills. I dug through it, my fingers moving fast. At the bottom, crumpled into a ball, was a printed invoice. I smoothed it out on the counter. The logo at the top was for a website called Prop Bumps. Realistic maternity prosthetics for film and theater. Item: the second trimester illusion, silicone belly shade fair. Price $149.99. Shipping address: Lily Thomas. I stared at it. I wanted to laugh. It was so absurd, so grotesque. She wasn't just lying. She was wearing a costume. She was playing a character in a tragedy she had written herself. I pulled out my phone. I took a photo of the invoice. I took 3 photos, ensuring the date and the item description were legible. Then I crumpled it back up and shoved it deep into the bottom of her bag, exactly where I had found it. I walked to the bathroom door. I could hear water running, but I could also hear the rustle of clothing. I quietly put my eye to the crack in the doorframe. Lily was adjusting the prosthetic. She had lifted her hoodie and was tightening a strap that went around her lower back. She smoothed the silicone down, checking it in the mirror. Practicing her waddle, she looked at her reflection and smirked. It was a cold, satisfied smirk that vanished the moment she turned off the faucet. I stepped back, my heart pounding. I retreated to the kitchen. When Lily came out, she looked tragic again. It stopped, she whispered. But I still feel cramping. Did you find the checkbook? I looked at her. I looked at the sister I had protected my whole life standing there wearing a $150 lie strapped to her stomach. I can't find it. I lied. But listen, we can't keep doing this piecemeal. It's too stressful for you. We need to settle this properly for good. Her eyes lit up. What do you mean? I mean, I'm tired of fighting, I said, putting on the mask of the defeated wife. You win, Lily. I want to give you what you asked for. I want to give Blake the 50-50 split. I want to set up a trust for the baby. I want you guys to be safe. Lily let out a breath, her shoulders sagging in relief. Oh, Ava, thank you. I knew you would understand. You are so good. Let's meet tomorrow night, I said the Copperfinch. 7:00. Tell Blake to bring the divorce papers he printed. We'll sign everything. We'll celebrate your new life. Okay, she said, beaming. She hugged me again, pressing that rubber belly against me. You are the best sister in the world. I know, I said. Go home and rest. Don't worry about the clinic. We'll get you the best doctor's money can buy starting tomorrow. She left, practically skipping out the door, cured of her miscarriage by the promise of a payday. I waited until she was gone. Then I called Nora. I have the smoking gun, I said. She's wearing a fake belly. I have the receipt. I have the photos. Oh, this is going to be fun, Nora said, her voice dark with anticipation. You are ready, Ava. The trap is set. That night, I prepared a legal-sized envelope and filled it with everything: the fake belly invoice, the fertility report, the postnup. When I sealed it and felt its weight in my hands, it didn't feel like paper. It felt like justice. Nora's advice echoed in my head. Let them talk first. Let them dig the hole. Let them get comfortable in their greed. Make them say the words. Make them claim the baby is his. Make them demand the money. And then drop the hammer. I slept soundly that night for the first time in 3 weeks. I didn't dream of drowning. I dreamed of a guillotine, and I was the one holding the rope. The Copperfinch was waiting. The stage was set, and my dear husband and sister were about to walk into a performance they would never forget. The hands on the antique clock above the bar at the Copperfinch pointed to 7:00 exactly when the heavy oak doors swung open. I was sitting in the same booth as before, wearing the same dark green dress I had worn on the night my life imploded. I had debated changing, perhaps wearing a power suit to signal that this was a business transaction, but I decided against it. I wanted them to see the woman they thought they had destroyed. I wanted them to see that the silk was unwrinkled and that the woman inside it was made of reinforced steel. They walked in, and the transformation was nauseating. 3 weeks ago, they had been nervous, fidgeting like teenagers caught shoplifting. Tonight, they walked with the swagger of lottery winners who had just cashed the ticket. Blake was wearing his best navy blazer, the one I had bought him for our anniversary, and he had polished his shoes. He guided Lily with a protective hand on the small of her back, parading her through the dining room as if she were carrying the Messiah rather than a silicone prop purchased for $149. Lily was radiant. She had tied her hair back in a soft maternal bun and was wearing a flowy pastel dress that emphasized the prosthetic bump. She looked the part perfectly. She looked like the glowing, fertile mother-to-be. While I sat in the corner, the barren, cold career woman about to be discarded, they reached the table. Blake pulled out Lily's chair with a flourish that was entirely performative. He waited until she was settled, adjusting her napkin for her before he sat down and looked at me. "Ava," he said, nodding solemnly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I know this is hard, but I'm glad we are doing this the right way." He signaled the waiter before I could respond. "Water for the lady," Blake instructed, pointing to Lily. "Room temperature, please. Cold water upsets her stomach. And bring a Pinot Noir for my wife." He hesitated on the word wife, savoring the awkwardness of it. He was playing the role of the benevolent patriarch, the man making the tough decisions for the good of his new expanding family. "I do not want wine," I said, my voice steady. "I want to hear the numbers." Blake smiled. A tight, condescending expression that suggested he forgave my rudeness because I was clearly emotional. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. It was thin. It was pathetic compared to the heavy envelope resting on the seat beside me. "Right," Blake said, clasping his hands on the table. "We have been thinking a lot about what is fair. We want you to be happy, Ava. We really do, but we have to be realistic about the needs of the baby." He opened his folder and slid a single sheet of paper toward me. It was a spreadsheet. A very simple, very optimistic spreadsheet. "The proposal is simple," Blake said, tapping the paper with his index finger. "We sell the River North apartment. The market is hot right now. We take the equity and split it 50-50. That gives you a nice nest egg to find a smaller place, maybe a condo closer to your office, and it gives Lily and me enough for a down payment on a family home in the suburbs, something with a yard." I stared at the paper. He was asking for half of the asset that my LLC owned, the asset he had never paid a dime toward. "And regarding the liquid assets," Blake continued, gaining confidence when I didn't immediately flip the table. "We know you have the investment accounts, the stocks, the bonds. Since we were married during the accumulation phase, I think a 50% split is standard, but to show good faith, I am willing to take 40%. I am willing to leave you with the majority share." He paused, waiting for gratitude. When none came, he cleared his throat. "However," he added, "given that I will be the primary earner for our new household while Lily is nursing, and considering my commission checks are volatile, we are asking for spousal support just for 3 years. $5, $1 a month, just until the baby is in preschool and I can stabilize my income. $5, $1 a month." He wanted me to pay him a salary for the job of sleeping with my sister. Lily reached across the table. She didn't try to touch me this time, likely sensing the radioactive field of hatred radiating off me. Instead, she placed her hand on her chest, looking at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Ava, please," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "I know this sounds like a lot, but remember where we came from. Remember the apartment in Ohio? Remember how Mom and Dad struggled? You do not want that for this baby. You do not want your niece or nephew to grow up worrying about the electric bill. She paused to let the guilt sink in, then pivoted to flattery. You have always been the strong one. You are the rock. You have a big career. You have Atlas Bridge. You can make this money back in a year. We can't. We need this head start. If you do not do it for us, do it for Mom and Dad. If we have to drag this through court, if we have to fight, it will kill them. Mom's heart is already so weak. Do you really want to be the reason she ends up in the hospital? It was a masterstroke of emotional blackmail. She was weaponizing my own competence against me. She was arguing that because I was capable of surviving without their help, I was obligated to let them cannibalize me. And besides, Lily added, her hand drifting down to the silicone lump under her dress. Stress is so bad for the pregnancy. The doctor said that with the timeline since I am already entering the second trimester, I need absolute calm. I felt the baby kick for the first time yesterday when we were arguing about bills. I do not want to put the baby through that. I froze. My hand, which had been reaching for my water glass, stopped in midair, entering the second trimester 3 weeks ago during the first dinner. They had claimed this was a recent accident. They had said it happened while I was in Seattle last month. That would make her 6, maybe 7 weeks pregnant. At 7 weeks, the fetus is the size of a blueberry. You do not feel kicks. You do not enter the second trimester. If she was claiming to be in the second trimester, that meant the affair had started at least 4 months ago, long before the one-time mistake narrative they had sold me. She had just admitted in her eagerness to play the victim that they had been lying about the timeline from the very beginning. She was so wrapped up in her lie about the pregnancy symptoms that she forgot her lie about the conception date. I looked at Blake. He hadn't noticed. He was too busy staring at the equity numbers on his spreadsheet, mentally spending the money on a new truck. So that is the offer, Blake said, looking up and flashing a sad, regretful smile. We settled tonight. We signed the preliminary agreement. You agreed to the sale and the support payments, and in exchange, we keep this quiet. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Think about your position, Ava. You are a vice president now. Atlas Bridge is a conservative company. They do not like mess. If we go to court, if this becomes a public divorce with allegations of neglect or emotional cruelty, it would be on the public record. It would be embarrassing. We are offering you a clean break. We are offering to save your reputation. There it was, the final threat, the velvet-covered hammer. He was not just asking for money. He was threatening to torch my career if I didn't hand it over. I looked at them. I looked at the husband who thought he was sterile but was claiming a child. I looked at the sister who was wearing a movie prop and threatening our mother's health. I looked at 2 people who were so blinded by their own greed that they hadn't realized they were sitting in a trap. They were waiting for me to cry. They were waiting for me to pull out a checkbook. They were waiting for Eva, who fixed everything, to start negotiating the terms of her own surrender. I picked up my wine glass. I took a long, slow sip. The liquid was cool and tart. I swallowed, feeling it burned pleasantly in my throat. I set the glass down on the white tablecloth with a deliberate, soft click. I did not say a word. I simply reached down to the seat beside me and lifted the heavy, legal-sized envelope. I placed it on the table. It landed with the same heavy thud as the first one had 3 weeks ago. But this time, the sound wasn't a question. It was an answer. You are right, Blake, I said, my voice soft, almost gentle. We should definitely clear the air, and we should definitely look at the paperwork. I slid the envelope toward them. But before we talk about splitting my assets, I said, a cold smile finally reaching my eyes, I think we need to talk about what is actually inside that envelope. And I think we need to talk about what is actually inside Lily's dress. Their smiles faltered. The air in the restaurant seemed to vanish. I watched the blood drain from Blake's face as he looked at the thick packet of papers, realizing too late that this was not a settlement offer. It was an indictment. I reached into the envelope. I did not rush. I moved with the deliberate, agonizing slowness of a surgeon selecting the correct scalpel for an amputation. The restaurant was buzzing with the low murmur of happy couples and business deals. But at our table, the silence was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a courtroom right before the verdict was read. I pulled out the first document. It was a thick stack of paper stapled at the top corner, the edges crisp and sharp. I set it down directly in front of Blake, smoothing the cover page with my palm. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. Blake squinted at the document. He looked confused, his brow furrowing as he read the title in bold capitalized letters. "Post-nuptial property agreement," he read aloud, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked up at me, a nervous laugh bubbling in his throat. "What is this, Ava? We never signed a postnup. You talked about it once, but we never lay." I said. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It cut through the air with the precision of a laser. He flipped the pages, his hands starting to tremble. He reached the signature block. There, in blue ink, was his signature. It was messy, scrolled in haste, but it was undeniably his. And right next to it was a date from 3 years ago. "Does the date ring a bell?" I asked, taking a sip of my water. "Let me refresh your memory." It was November 16th. It was 3:00 in the morning. You called me from a police station holding cell because you had driven your truck into a parked Lexus after a night out with your friends. You were drunk. You were terrified. You were facing a DUI and a lawsuit that would have bankrupted you before you even started. Lily's eyes widened. She looked at Blake, who was suddenly very interested in the tablecloth. "You got a DUI," she whispered. "You told me you had a clean record." "I fixed it," I continued, ignoring Lily. "I hired the best defense attorney in the city. I paid the owner of the Lexus $25, $0 out of pocket to settle the damages privately so they would not press charges. I saved your license. I saved your reputation. But I told you then, Blake, that my generosity had a price." I pointed to the document. "I told you that if I was going to use my assets to clean up your mess, I needed to ensure that my assets stayed mine. Nora drafted this. She made sure you had independent counsel. Do you remember Robert Davis, the lawyer I paid $500 an hour to represent you, just to make sure you couldn't claim coercion later?" "I thought that was insurance paperwork," Blake stammered. The sweat was now visible on his upper lip. "I was hungover. I was stressed. You just put papers in front of me and said sign if I wanted to go home. I didn't know I was signing away my rights." Ignorance of the law excuses no one, especially when you have a lawyer sitting next to you explaining every clause, I said coldly. "But let's look at what you signed away, shall we?" I reached over and flipped the document to page 4. I ran my finger down the text, stopping at a paragraph highlighted in yellow. Clause 7, Section A. I read aloud. "The party identified as husband acknowledges that the property located at River North Chicago, held under the entity Thomas Harbor LLC, is the sole and separate property of the wife. Husband waives any and all claims to equity, appreciation, or residence in said property in the event of separation or divorce." I looked up. Blake's face had drained of all color. It was a mask of gray putty. "And here," I said, flipping to the next page, Clause 9, "all investment accounts, stocks, options, and retirement funds held in the wife's name or acquired through her employment at Atlas Bridge Logistics remain separate property. Husband acknowledges he has made no financial contribution to these accounts and waives all rights to equitable distribution." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "So, Blake, that 50-50 split? You just proposed that nest egg for your new family. It does not exist. You signed it away 3 years ago to stay out of jail." Lily made a noise that sounded like a strangled cat. She snatched the document from under Blake's nose. Her eyes darted across the pages, scanning desperately for a loophole, for a mistake, for anything that would salvage her payday. This can't be legal, she hissed, her voice rising in pitch. You can't just make him sign away everything we have rights. We have a baby. Read Clause 12. Lily, I said, pointing to the bottom of the page she was clutching. It is my favorite part. She looked down. Her lips moved as she read the legal jargon. In the event of infidelity resulting in the dissolution of the marriage, the offending party forfeits any claim to temporary or permanent spousal support. I filed for divorce this morning, I announced calmly, uncontested. On the grounds of adultery, I have the texts. I have your confession from 3 weeks ago, and now I have this document. I looked at Blake, who was now slumped in his chair, looking like a man who had just watched his house burn down. So, here is the new reality, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly conversational tone. You leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it. Your truck, which still has payments left on it, your clothes and your golf clubs. That is it. No apartment money, no stock options, no $5,000 a month. Blake looked up at me, his eyes wet. Ava, you can't do this. I have nowhere to go. I have no savings. How am I supposed to live? You should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with my sister, I said. But wait, I am not done. I pulled a second, thinner document from the envelope. Do you remember the loan agreement? I asked. The one for the $42 Audi dollars I paid to clear your debts before we got married and the $25,000 for the Lexus accident, and the interest that has been accruing for 5 years. I slid the paper across the table. It landed on top of the postnup. According to this contract, which is also notarized, those were not gifts. They were callable loans. That means I can demand repayment in full at any time. I leaned forward, my face inches from his. I am demanding it now, Blake. The total with interest is roughly $84,000. I could sue you for it. I could garnish your wages for the next 10 years. I could take your truck. I could make sure you never qualify for a credit card again. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Blake was trembling visibly now. Lily was staring at him with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. She wasn't looking at him with love. She wasn't looking at him as the father of her child. She was looking at him like he was a bad investment she needed to dump immediately. You broke, Lily whispered. The word hung in the air, ugly and raw. You are completely broke. Eva. Please, Blake begged, ignoring Lily. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. I can't pay that, you know. I can't pay that. Have mercy. We were married for 5 years. Does that mean nothing? It meant everything to me, I said softly. That is why I paid your debts. That is why I saved you from jail. That is why I built this life for us. But it clearly meant nothing to you. I sat back, smoothing my dress. However, I said, letting the word hang there, I am a reasonable woman. I might be persuaded to forgive the debt. I might be persuaded to let you walk away with just your clothes and no lawsuit hanging over your head. Blake's head snapped up. How I will do anything. Tell me what to do. Sign the divorce papers exactly as Nora drafted them. I said, You leave with nothing. You will never contact me again. You admit to the adultery, so the divorce is granted immediately. Do that and I will tear up the loan agreement. You will be poor, Blake, but you will be free of debt. That is the only severance package you are getting from me. Blake nodded vigorously. I will sign. I will sign right now. Where is it? Blake! Lily shrieked. She grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging into his jacket. Are you crazy? You're just going to give up. What about us? What about the house? What about the baby? You promised you would take care of us. Blake turned on her. And for the first time, I saw the ugliness of his character directed at someone other than me. He shoved her hand off his arm. Shut up, Lily, he snapped. Do you not hear her? She owns everything. The apartment is an LLC. I have nothing. If I do not sign this, she is going to sue me for $80,000. I will be bankrupt. I can't buy you a house. I can't even buy you dinner." "You coward!" Lily yelled, forgetting to whisper. People at nearby tables turned to look. "You said you had a plan. You said she was soft. You said she would just pay us to go away." "She played us," Blake hissed back. "She had this planned for years. It is a trap. I watched them. I watched the love of a lifetime disintegrate in under 5 minutes when the oxygen of money was cut off. It was pathetic. It was satisfying, but it wasn't over." I picked up my wine glass again, swirling the red liquid. I looked at Lily, whose face was flushed with rage and panic. She realized that her golden goose was actually a cooked turkey. She was realizing that she was stuck with a broken, spineless man and a lie that was about to become very expensive to maintain. I cleared my throat. They both stopped arguing and looked at me, remembering who held the whip. "You two seem upset," I said calmly, "and I understand it is a shock to find out that your retirement plan has been canceled, but you should save some of that energy." I reached into the envelope one last time. "Because," I said, my hand closing around the final stack of papers, the medical report, and the photos of the silicone belly. "That was only the first half of the secret. We haven't even talked about the baby yet." I saw Lily's eyes widen. I saw the blood drain from her face, leaving her looking like a ghost in a pastel dress. She knew in that split second. She knew that I knew. "And trust me," I said, pulling the papers out and holding them face down on the table, my hand resting on top of them like a lid on a box of vipers. "This part is much, much worse." I kept my hand on the final stack of papers, feeling the cool surface of the top sheet against my palm. The restaurant was warm, filled with the smell of roasted garlic and red wine, but the air around our table was absolute zero. Blake was still reeling from the financial blow, his face pale and slick with sweat. Lily was glaring at him, her chest heaving, trapped between her greed and the sudden realization that her accomplice was useless. "You said there was a second half," Blake whispered, his voice cracking. He looked like a man who had already been shot but was still waiting to fall down. "What else could you possibly have? You already took the money. You took the house?" "I took the money because it was mine," I corrected him gently. "But this is about what you think is yours." I flipped the stack of papers over. The top document was not a contract. It was a medical report. I slid it across the tablecloth, navigating it around the vase of fresh flowers that Blake had so optimistically ordered. It came to rest directly under his nose. "Do you recognize the logo, Blake?" I asked. "The Fertility Institute of Chicago. We went there last year. You complained about the parking. You complained about the nurse. You complained that the sample cup was too small." Blake stared at the paper. His eyes darted back and forth, trying to make sense of the clinical font. "We never got the results," he muttered. "Mom had her stroke. We forgot." "We did not get them," I said. "But they mailed them. They sat in the safe for a year. I opened them 3 days ago." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "Read the diagnosis, Blake. Read the line at the bottom." He read it. I watched his lips move. "Aospermia. Complete absence of sperm. Sterility. The doctor noted your history of MS when you were 14, I continued, reciting the facts I had memorized. He wrote that the damage was catastrophic. He wrote that your chances of conceiving a child naturally are not just low, they are 0. Statistically impossible. I sat back, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "So," I said, turning my gaze slowly toward Lily. She was frozen, her hand clutching the wine glass so hard I thought it might shatter. "That brings us to an interesting question. If Blake is sterile, and has been sterile since he was a teenager, then who exactly is inside your stomach, Lily?" The silence that followed was heavy. It was the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. Blake looked up from the paper. He looked at me, his eyes wide with confusion. Then he turned his head slowly, robotically toward Lily. The realization hit him in waves. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally a rage so pure it made his features distort. "You said it was mine," Blake whispered. His voice was shaking. "You swore. You told me the dates. You told me it was a miracle. It is a mistake." Lily stammered, her face turning a blotchy red. "That test is wrong. Doctors make mistakes all the time. It is your baby, Blake. I feel it. It has your eyes. I know it is yours." "Does he have eyes?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "That is impressive for a fetus that is supposedly only a few months old. But Lily, you do not have to lie anymore because we know there is no baby." I reached for the next sheet of paper in the pile. I slammed it down on top of the medical report. It was the invoice. The print was large and damning. Prop bumps. COM. The second trimester illusion silicone, $140. 99. "I found this in your purse," I said coldly, "while you were in my bathroom practicing your waddle. And this?" I laid down the photos, the grainy high-contrast images of the silicone ridge peeking out from her waistband, the unnatural smoothness of the skin that didn't match her own tone. "And finally," I said, dropping the last piece of paper, a screenshot I had taken of a notification on her phone when she left it on the table to go to the bathroom during her miscarriage scare. "A text to your friend Sarah." I read it aloud, my voice devoid of emotion. "He is so dumb. As soon as she signs the papers and transfers the cash, I am going to stage a miscarriage. I will say it was the stress." Then we split the money and I went to Cabo. My life is finally starting. Blake made a sound like a wounded animal. He stood up so abruptly his chair fell backward with a loud crash. He stared at the invoice. He stared at the photo. He stared at the woman he had destroyed his marriage for. "It is fake," he choked out. He reached out, and before Lily could stop him, he grabbed the front of her pastel dress. "No, don't touch me," Lily shrieked, batting his hands away. But he had already made contact. He felt it. He felt the hard, rubbery resistance of the prosthetic. He recoiled as if he had touched a snake. "You are wearing a costume," Blake said, his voice rising to a shout. "You are not pregnant. You are just fat and lying. I did it for us." Lily screamed back, abandoning the act. Her face twisted into a snarl. "We needed the money. You are broke. You are a loser who sells used cars. How else were we going to get her money? I had to come up with a plan because you are too stupid to think of anything." "You ruined my life," Blake roared. "I left my wife for you. I signed away everything because I thought I was being a father. You ruined your own life." Lily spat. "You were the one who slept with me. You were the one who wanted an ego boost because Eva was too successful for you." They were screaming at each other now, standing in the middle of the fine dining restaurant, hurling insults and accusations while the other patrons stared in shocked silence. The waiter was hurrying over, looking panicked. I watched them. I watched the two people who had conspired to bleed me dry now tearing each other apart. It was ugly. It was loud. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I cleared my throat. It wasn't a loud sound, but it cut through their screaming match. They both stopped, panting, and looked at me. They seemed to remember all at once that I was still the one holding the cards. "Sit down," I said. They hesitated, but they sat. Blake pulled his chair back up. Lily smoothed her dress over the fake bump, looking sullen and cornered. "Here is how this night ends," I said. I folded my hands on the table. "I have enough evidence on this table to send you both to jail. This is fraud. This is attempted extortion. This is a conspiracy to commit theft. If I take this to the police, you go to prison. If I take this to Atlas Bridge, Blake, you will never get a job in this city again. And Lily, if I show this to Mom and Dad, well, the shock might actually kill Mom, but you will definitely be disowned." Lily went pale. The fight drained out of her. "Eva, please don't tell Mom." "Please, I do not want to destroy the family," I said. Contrary to popular belief, I am not cruel. I just want to be free. I pushed the divorce papers toward Blake. I handed him a pen. Sign the papers, I commanded. Uncontested divorce. You admit to adultery. You waive all rights to my assets. You waive spousal support. You acknowledge the debt is forgiven in exchange for a clean break. Blake grabbed the pen. He didn't even read the text. He signed his name so fast the ink smeared. He pushed the papers back to me, his hands shaking. And you, I said, turning to Lily. You are going to disappear. You are going to go home, pack your things, and you are going to go back to Ohio. You are going to tell Mom and Dad that you decided the city wasn't for you. And in a few weeks, you are going to tell them you had a miscarriage, a natural one. You will not blame me. You will not blame stress. You will say it just happened. If I hear one word, I continued, my voice hardening. If I hear that you have asked me for money, or used my name to open a credit card, or told anyone a sob story about how your mean sister abandoned you, I will release these photos. I will send the invoice to everyone we know. I will make sure the whole world sees the receipt for the rubber stomach you are wearing. Lily nodded. She was crying now. Real tears this time. The tears of a con artist who had been outplayed. I promise. I swear, Eva. I gathered the papers. I checked Blake's signature. It was valid. I put everything back into the envelope, the post-nup, the medical report, the invoice, the photos. I closed the clasp. I stood up. One last thing, Lily, I said, looking down at her. She looked small and pathetic in her expensive maternity dress. If one day you actually do have a child, I said, my voice quiet but piercing, I hope you learn to be a mother because a real mother protects her child. She doesn't use them as a bargaining chip, and she certainly doesn't invent them to steal from her sister. Do not teach your future children that love is a transaction. It is the only lesson I'm going to give you for free. I picked up my purse. I picked up the envelope. The bill is yours, I said to Blake. I assume you can't pay it, but that is not my department anymore. I turned and walked away. Ava, Blake called out. His voice was desperate, terrified. Ava, wait. How am I supposed to get home? You took the car. I did not stop. I did not turn around. I walked past the hostess stand, past the valet who held the door open for me. I stepped out into the biting Chicago night. The air was cold, sharp, and clean. It smelled of rain and exhaust and wet pavement. I walked to my car, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat on the sidewalk. I unlocked the door and tossed the heavy envelope onto the passenger seat. It sat there, a pile of paper that used to be the weight of my world. Now just legal trash to be filed away. I started the engine. The dashboard lit up, glowing warm and bright. I put the car in drive and pulled out into the traffic. As I merged onto the highway, watching the lights of the city streak past me, I took a deep breath. My chest expanded, filling with air. And for the first time in 3 weeks, for the first time in 10 years, there was no pressure. There was no weight. I was alone, and I was free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. This was a long journey for Eva, and I'm so glad you stayed until the very end to see justice served. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please comment below with your city or country, and let me know what you would have done if you were in Eva's shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to see karma in action. See you in the next video.